In this second part of the Don King story, we're going to be covering his time with Larry Holmes, with Mike Tyson. We're also going to be covering the extortion of the ABC network, boxing shows that took place in prisons, and of course, all the other stories that made him what he is today, one of the showmen of boxing, one of the greatest promoters, but he was also a man that did a lot of wheeling, a lot of dealing, and certainly a lot of stealing. Welcome back, fight fans, to part 2 of the Don King story, wheeling, dealing and stealing. And we're going to pick up right where we left off from the last episode, which is just after the rumble in the jungle. I'm going in to the infamous thriller in Manila. So now we're going to move into the thriller in Manila and the subsequent breakup with Muhammad Ali. So on October the 1st, 1975, King and Bob Arum actually co-promoted the thriller in Manila, the rubber match, which was won by Ali, and it's a fight, again, that we've covered for the Legendary Night series. Please go and check that out. The unprecedented moment that King and Arum agreed to work with each other was arranged by a public relations legend. Harold Conrad. He was a gentleman that King respected because he had once worked for a Florida casino owned by Meyer Lansky. Now, they agreed King would be the main promoter and that Arum would handle the closed circuit side of the fight, mainly because King had fell out with his former friend Hank Schwartz. Arum, who was also supposed to get a percentage of the gross, plus a guaranteed fee of $300,000. But weeks before the fight, Arum was already accusing King of skimming and scheming to underreport the gross receipts and cheat Arum, who said, "By the end, I let King buy out my interest. I was so disgusted. I was terrified Don was doing things that would get us all arrested." Ferdinand Marcos, the leader of the Philippines, was putting up all the money for this fight, and I was in his country, and Don was fooling around with his money. That's why I pulled back at the end. Don wanted me to sign some documents, and I just refused. I was scared.
Don King and Arum scared. Wow, there you go. So by the close of 1975, King began to shit stir between Ali and Herbert Mohammed, with the aim of taking over Ali's career. Obviously, we didn't mention the thriller minute. Obviously, we have done that. So Ali did win that fight, if you didn't know. So King, what he wanted total control of Ali, and the same way Mike Jacobs had done with Joe Louis, something we done in our Darker Side of Boxing episode about the Mafia. We're going into great detail with that. Go and check that out. Now, this move was for full control and actually ended up breaking King's relationship with Ali and Herbert to the point of no return. Now, Babur Muhammad actually recalled Don tried a hostile takeover of Muhammad Ali and it failed. He was relying on the flunkies he was paying off. He underestimated the bond between Ali and Herbert, the religious piece. That's why, to this day, Orthodox Muslims don't like Don King. He tried to cheat the messenger's son. Now, Herbert Mohammed actually told the whole story to Tom Hauser, and he said, "I know he, as in King, paid people in the camp. I know he tried to talk to Ali behind my back. Ali was hearing from certain people. Herbert is taking 1/3 and he's not even here. Maybe we should get rid of Herbert." But I never confronted Don about it because I had confidence in my closeness to Ali. I knew Don would never be able to come between us, and Don resented that. To this day, he doesn't like me. He hates my guts, really. Don wants to make any fighter feel he doesn't need a manager. Believe me, if you're a fighter, you don't need to deal with Don King without a manager.
Well, that's certainly something that is good advice, but certainly something that was good advice too late down the line, to be honest with you. But it's interesting where we now take a different turn, and Don King goes from not just extorting people, he now goes to extorting TV networks. So while King was frozen out following his antics, Herbert gave Arum and Butch Lewis the Norton, Shavers and both Spinks fights. That's when he approached the ABC television network following the 1976 Olympics when he identified an opening. He approached ABC with the concepts of staging an elimination tournament of the best young American fighters to crown true blue loyal American champions. Al Breyerman and Paddy Flood would be his matchmakers and talent scouts, and the Ring magazine, known as the Bible of Boxing, was to give his tournament the credibility it needed. Now, in April 1976, before any meetings were held with the ABC executives, King gave Johnny Orr, a writer for the Ring and who controlled their rankings, $2,000 in cash. Later in the year, he would give Ort another $3,000 in cash. King also approached James Farley, the chairman of the New York Boxing Commission, and won his agreement to be the supervisor of the tournament in exchange for expenses and travel reimbursements. In June and July, King held a series of negotiations with the executives at ABC Sports, pitching his tournament idea, and he promised to provide ABC Network big heavyweight fights involving Foreman and the top heavyweight Larry Holmes. King met mostly with Jim Spence, the vice president for program planning for ABC Sports, and by the end of July, he had sold his project, drafted copies of the contracts which he substituted with Spence. The deal was for ABC to pay Don King $1.5 million, which later increased to $2 million for him to provide 48 fights, 23 hours of boxing on TV, which would lead to the crowning of an American champion across selected divisions. King got $250,000 fees as a promoter and another $200,000 to pay the matchmakers Flood and Braverman. Now, on July the 30th, King sent the Ring magazine a $10,000 check to alleviate expenses incurred in preparing the ratings of the many fighters that will be participants in the tournament, and this big scam was all set.
So only fighters aligned with Flood, Braverman or their friends were allowed in the tournament, which meant good paydays and television exposure. Alt began to manipulate the Ring magazine ratings to justify the entry of some fighters or to justify the exclusion of others. Some boxers who wanted admission were told they had to pay a kickback, a portion of their purses. They had to give a kickback to them if they want to be a part of it, if they wanted to keep their managers, or they had to get rid of their present managers for Don King. So it was a great scam. If you want to come in, if you're not a part of the crew, you want to come in, you give us some money, or you get rid of your manager and Don King becomes your manager. And then Marvin Hagler was desperate to be involved in the tournament to give him the exposure that he needed. But his managers, the Petronelli brothers, later found out, in Goody's own words, King and his people wanted to take over Marvin's career. They insisted me and my brother surrender all our rights to Marvin. If they let him into the tournament, King would have become his new manager if he won. We don't do business that way. Marvin won the world title in 1980, and we never give him a single title defense promoted by King for the rest of Marvin's career.
Well, they were certainly the smart ones in boxing at that time. They obviously knew something wasn't right, and they made the right decision, because who knows what would have happened in Marvin Hagler's career. Would he have excelled to the heights he excelled at? Well, there's just so many questions there about certain situations. Now, some of the fighters who got in this tournament were managed by Braverman and Flood, and others were co-managed or managed by King, and rumours of tampering with rankings began to surface. Despite this, King managed to get an additional $500,000 from ABC to be added to his contract because of budget miscalculations. When the Ring record book was published in April 1977, Johnny Orr had added 2 imaginary wins to a fighter's career record. Now, by November, ABC's corporate lawyers approved contracts that the fighters would be asked to sign with Don King's Productions, which had a clause saying that if the fighter won the tournament, King would have the option to promote all of the fighters' boxing bouts for the next 2 years. ABC did begin to question King's selection of poor white fighters, but King always responded with, the public wants to see fights between white and black fighters. In November, King gave Johnny Orr his second cash payment of $3,000 and wrote a check for $5,000 further to Orr, which King ripped up for accounting reasons. We say that with inverted commas ripped up because I think we know what really happened in that particular incident. So, Johnston, you're now going to move on to certain allegations that were put against Don King.
Yeah, so Alex Wallu, who worked for ABC, was quite a young guy, just recently come into the ABC network, and a guy called Malcolm Flash Gordon, who was actually a diehard boxing writer that had thousands of savvy boxing followers who basically noticed this scam first and compiled two in-depth memos detailing each fighter due to participate in the tournament to Spence and other bosses within the ABC. It outlined 25 of more than 30 fighters in the tournament qualified. 11 boxers were identified as marginal and 14 fighters were basically described as disgraces or jokes. ABC still stood by King, especially after a respected Sports Illustrated writer in Mark Cram gave the tournament more credibility in his 4-page articles and quoted Don King as saying, "I'm here to tell Madison Square Garden, its stockholders, Teddy Bremner, God bless them, that boxing is back, Jack. The sport of the dispossessed will be climbing the mountain. Don doesn't need the garden needs Don King." Several months after the article was published, Sports Illustrated quietly forced Cram to resign after accepting gifts and bonuses from Don King. A senior Sports Illustrated executive told Jack Newfield Cram took money from King. One of our own writers, Bill Boyle, found out about it. King claimed it was a loan. We had to let Cram go, although we never made it a public announcement about it. So apparently a very talented writer in Mr. Cram ended up losing his job because of back payments from Mr. Don King, Mr. Slippery himself.
So now we move into a certain Howard Cosell and his syrup. So on January the 16th, the first tournament card was aired from the USS Lexington, with the fights all going the distance. King's second tournament was staged at another federal property outside the reach of any local boxing commission on February the 13th at the US Naval Academy. King's staff picked the judges and referee for the heavyweight fight between Scott Ledoux and Johnny Bordereau, who was managed by Flood. Now, Ledoux was winning the fight clearly, and even the television commentators, Howard Cosell and George Foreman, both made it clear that they thought Ledoux was winning the fight. But the unanimous decision went the opposite way, with Cosell shouting in disbelief. They gave it to Bordereau. The poor judging decision led to one of the most bizarre moments in television history. Now, Ledoux lost control of his emotions and tried to kick his opponent, but instead he actually kicked Howard Cosell's hairpiece off his head live on national television. Now, when Howard Cosell actually retrieved his hairpiece, he momentarily put it on backwards. And after Cosell got his toupee back on the right way, he did quite a professional interview with the still enraged Ledoux. Now, the fighter told the national audience that the whole tournament was fixed to favour fighters aligned with King, Flood and Braverman. He said he had been warned not to take the fight with Bordereau because of his opponent's financial ties to Flood, but he felt they couldn't steal the decision on national television. Boy, were they wrong. Now, Cosell then interviewed King, who dismissed Ledoux's views as absurd and assured Cosell he had taken every possible precaution to make the tournament an open, honest competition.
Now, sometimes the fighters say, the fighters now, Don, that you're a great promoter, not the greatest businessman in the world. When the television money doesn't come through, you have to force the fighters to take a cut. But they also add, when there's a big profit to be made, they never see any extra money coming their way. What about that?
Roy, now, Roy. You must understand that I couldn't even get to the television when I came. You must understand I'm a pioneer and a trailblazer. And so I must be able to deal with whatever unforeseeable contingency arises, whether it comes from behind a tree or under a rock. I must be able to deal with it extemporaneously and deal with it pragmatically and realistically. When I came into the boxing world, they didn't let Mavericks in. They didn't particularly care for white Mavericks. But they didn't let black ones through the portals to the arena. So now I had to go around the world. You have to recall this. Now, before I ever promoted in America, I was promoting in the Thrill in Manila, the Rumble in the Jungle. You know, and in Caracas, Venezuela, I opened up the Poliedro. So I bought the prodigal son returned home by acclaim because all the major events was going to other countries in So therefore, they then let me come home to promote. So I didn't have television then. I was doing it from out there, from governments and from relationships with people all around the world. Now when I come in with television, what a person believes he's worth and what the deal is two different things. Many fighters have inflated beliefs of their worth, and so they say, you got to cut. The cut means that I have given them what reality pragmatically indicates and dictates, and what they had in their mind was a higher figure. So in their mind, they say it was a cut. I have never cut any fighter. You know what I mean? So it's a difference in what they're thinking. If they say, give me 10 million, I say, well, I can't give you but 5. I'm going to do it for you, but you cut me 5 million. So those kind of things go, and that's pervasive in our business, and I understand that. They're great athletes, and I'd love to promote them. And then I revolutionized the pay scale in boxing. I paid fighters more money than anyone in the history of the sport.
That is a true fact.
You know what I mean?
That has been documented.
So when only thing I could be guilty of is hitting them in the head with $100 bills, giving them dignity, pride, and a lot of money.
Bollocks. So after that, the shenanigans of the old syrup with Cassell. So after that second tournament, this is the third part of the tournament. It was actually a prison fight. So after that second tournament was publicly scrutinised, an internal investigation actually began, and the outcome was to stop taking booking fees from fighters. That was all they did by adding a contract to ensure it. But the third tournament still went ahead, which was held on March 16 from the gym of the Marion prison in front of 1,300 armed robbers, rapists, and murderers. It was billed as King's homecoming to Alma Mater, what it was promoted as or billed as. And King wore a $30,000 diamond ring, $9,000 watch, and his usual stack of $5,000 in his pocket. And he said, "So I don't feel naked." King said, so the fights were poor, and they were later described by Mark Jacobson in the Village Voice as a bunch of smelly mismatches and slow waltzes, causing one guy to yell, "Hurry up, I've only got 20 years. So they were really bad. Yet King still continues to defend the ridiculous tournament, saying, "I will not wither in the face of this salvo after salvo of invective, and this tournament is as honest as the day is long, as clean as the spring afternoon." So after a last resort, King did try to play his usual race card when he realised that the pressure was on by justifying these poor tournaments with fighters with phony records. But it began to take its toll, and it basically didn't work. And it was the publication of the 1977 Ring Record Book that was the final straw.
Which then led on to an investigation into the tournament, which I'll talk you through now. So now going back to Wallu and Gordon, who we'd spoke about earlier, they'd seen enough at this point, and they were the ones who compared the 1975, 76 and 77 Ring Record Books. They actually saw fabricated fights listed as taking place in 1975 that were not listed in the 1976 version of the book, but were then listed in the 1977 version of the book. They produced the evidence to the bosses at ABC once again and disclosed that the 1977 Ring Record Book contained 5 fake one-round knockouts in Biff Klein's record, 4 made-up wins for Richard Rozelle, 2 incorrect wins for Pat Dolan, 4 fictional knockouts for Anthony House, and 2 imaginary wins in Mexico for the retired Ike Fluellen. Johnny Baldwin was given 1 phony win in Mexico following his knockout by Hagler to make him look qualified. Hilbert Stevenson was given 5 phony wins plus a draw with Anthony House, both of whom were managed by Chris Klein. And on April the 16th, ABC finally pulled the plug on King's tournament and requested for lawyer Michael Armstrong to conduct an in-house inquiry for the ABC Corporation. ABC also cancelled the fight, the heavyweight final scheduled to be telecast that weekend between Larry Holmes and Stan Ward, both of whom were managed by Don King. Now King, of course, as usual, would blame everybody except himself for the fraud, shouting, "I am a nut on the truth bit." He suspended Flood and Braverman, saying they were not acting in the best interests of the sport we all love. King then called Ort a Judas, saying, "I am shocked, saddened and appalled that the ring is no longer the Bible of boxing." Teddy Brenner then joked, "If the ring is the Bible, then boxing needs a New Testament." Now, Ort blamed devious managers for sending him inaccurate fight results. In September, ABC released a summary of Armstrong's 327-page report. Armstrong found no criminal conduct, but did find a good deal of unethical behaviour by individuals involved in the administration and organisation of the tournament. The worst thing Armstrong said about King was that his $5,000 cash payment to Johnny Ort seriously compromised the integrity of the whole selection process. And then the report also said that Ort admitted to receiving money from managers whose fighters got into the tournament but left out the kickback payments to King, the attempted takeover of fighters or bribery of the rings. Somehow, King, Flood and Braverman were found not to be guilty of extortion and fraud.
Unbelievable. I really don't get that. Obviously, there was a lot of heads that were going to. There's too many guys in there that were going to lose their jobs. I think that's the only reason why it didn't happen. They weren't happy with the fact what they did, but I think that's all it come down to for me. When you look into it in more detail, that is basically why they got away with it. So now it turned into the Don King show by this point. After this, so he lost Ali. Aaron was taking over that part of it. He lost that heavyweight side of things. He's tried to find his way in with this ABC network. Hasn't worked. He's actually fallen flat on his face. Looked a bit of a joke, a fraud, extortion. Everybody knew it, but it soon turned into the Don King show. And on June 1978, Holmes got a call from Bob Arum offering to promote a fight on national television between Holmes and young Sanford Hawpe. Now, Holmes told King about the offer in an attempt to lure the two promoters into a bit of a bidding war for his services, and Arum offered Holmes $75,000 and King offered $10,000 for the same fight. Holmes told King he had to go for the best money, basically instigating he's going to go with Bob Arum. And King turns around and says to Holmes, "Don't you try and put a gun to my head, because I got those other troubles. You'll regret it if you do." After a bit of to-ing and fro-ing, Holmes asked King for more than the $10,000 he was offering, and King said he basically couldn't, but he promised Holmes a title shot if he would go along just this one last time. Then, according to Holmes and the topper off manuscript, Holmes actually said in his own words, "I said I wanted to talk to him again. I never see Don's face get the way it got, like he was in pain. His eyes turned cold and empty. He said really quietly, 'If you do, I'll have your legs broke.' Not for a single minute did I think he was kidding. Not for a single minute did I think he wasn't a real threat. And not for a single minute did I doubt Don could find the people to do the job. The first thing I did when I got back to Easton was pick up my .22 caliber Smith & Wesson. Later, Holmes would tell Jack Newfield, Don can talk a rattlesnake out of biting you."
Wow, so another crazy story with Don involved, and again, it begs the question as to why all these people would even go along with anything like this and all these intimidation tactics. So we move forward, and when Leon Spinks goes on to beat Ali in February of 1978, promised him an immediate rematch in September, King saw this honourable gesture as an opportunity to play boxing politics, and he called Jose Suleiman, the president of the WBC, and convinced him to strip Leon Spinks of the title for giving Ali an immediate rematch instead of fighting the number one contender and Don King fighter Ken Norton. Now, Suleiman agreed with King, and he actually stripped Spinks of his title. King then announced that ABC would televise a heavyweight title fight even after the shenanigans of the year before between Shavers, who would get $300,000, and Holmes, who got $200,000, but not from King's pocket. That $500,000 would come from ABC. Now, it was a win-win for King, who had Norton, Shavers and Holmes all under contract to him, as well as Jimmy Young and George Foreman, who King was still trying to talk into a comeback. Now, Holmes stopped Shavers and then won the WBC title against Norton in a fight we've, of course, covered for our Legendary Nights series, and it was the finale of the first season. Go back and check into the detail of that when we get some more stories in there as well. Now, King actually had no shame or remorse for anyone he ever conned, and this was never more evident than when he told Stan Hoffman, the manager of heavyweight James Broad. And in Don's words, "My philosophy is that all fighters are $2 whores. Never fall in love with your fighter. My rule is fuck the fighter before the fighter can fuck you. Never let the fighter become bigger than the promoter."
Fucking arsehole, really. Oh, shit. So on December 1978, King was the king of all the promoters in the heavyweight division. Obviously, the heavyweight division is where the money is. And he sent a letter to Gil Clancy at Madison Square Garden, probably a little bit to rub his nose in it, to prove it. And he listed the heavyweights he controlled. King wrote, "Please contact me for the services of the following fighters: Larry Holmes, heavyweight champion; Ken Norton, number 1 contender; Jimmy Young, number 2 contender; Ernie Shavers, number 3 contender; Leon Spinks, number 4 contender; Alfredo Evangelista, number 6 contender; Scott Ledoux, number 10 contender; Stan Ward, number 15 contender, plus Michael Dokes and Kevin Isaac." I think he's just basically rubbing his nose in it. And that was basically King at this moment in time, absolutely top of the food chain in the boxing promoter sense. So we move on to Don King versus Harold Smith.
Now, by the spring of 1980, Ali had retained the heavyweight title against Leon Spinks and retired, but many promoters tried to persuade him back with fights. Bob Arum wanted him to fight the WBA champion John Tate, but he got knocked out against Mike Weaver, which brought a halt to Arum's pursuit. So Murad Mohammed, Harold Smith and Don King all wanted Larry Holmes, but the WBC ruler, of course, held all the marbles, so the deals needed to have... He needed to have his final say for them deals, basically, for there to be a world title at stake. Now, Murad Mohammed offered Holmes $3 million to fight Ali in Egypt, but he was worried about the advantage he would get with a country that had a large Islamic population. Harold Smith, who had not yet been uncovered as an embezzler for $21 million from Wells Fargo National Bank, attempted to sign up Holmes in 1979 and would come the closest to getting a deal. Tempers flared between these two when Smith and King engaging in a physical confrontation inside Holmes' hotel suite in Las Vegas. Smith said that when the pushing and shoving stopped, King pulled out a pistol. Smith finally approached Holmes with a significant offer of $5 million to fight Ali. The exact offer was an immediate $1 million in cash and 2 checks for $500,000 drawn on the Wells Fargo of California. Before the meeting had started, Holmes called King from his office in Easton to tell him that Smith was going to offer him a deal, and while they were still negotiating, King arrived. The two promoters threatened and cursed each other, with King screaming Smith's money was drug money. Smith claimed he had investors in the Middle East. Holmes spoke of the confrontation and he said, "Don tried physical intimidation, but Smith didn't scare. That impressed me." In the end, Holmes didn't take the $1 million in cash or the $1 million in checks because he was nervous about the origins of the money, which is a bloody good job as well.
I'd say he could have, it probably would have been taken from him. I don't think anything would have happened to him, but yeah, good job he didn't, to be fair. He's actually just as dodgy as Don. And so this is the madness of the Larry Holmes. And this is actually, some of this stuff is where you really, the fact that Don's a convicted murderer, but this really makes me feel quite sick when we go through this. By the end of June, Don King had agreed a deal for both fighters and he promised Ali $8 million, Holmes 2.5, 25% of which King would take for himself. The most sickening part of this whole fight came when Ali's doctor's report actually arrived from the Nevada Commission. And it actually said, so this was the medical report, a CT scan of the head was performed and showed only a congenital variation. So the jargon basically meant there was a hole in the membrane separating the ventricles of the brain that can be enlarged by blows to the head, had basically been discovered, and that was before the fight. Now, other parts of the report did say he, as in Ali, does not quite hop with the agility that one might anticipate, and on finger to nose testing, there is a slight degree of a missing of the target, and he had some difficulty with memory. The report also said Ali suffered with the occasional tingling in the hands in the morning. The report also noted Ali claims that he always had some mild slurring of his speech for the past 10 to 12 years. Now, that we know ourselves that's absolutely a ridiculous statement, because you just need to just look at the footage of Ali to see that there was no slurring for the last 10 to 12 years. If Don King knew this information, now, if he hadn't sold his soul to the devil, I'm sure there would have been another promoter that would have taken this fight. Maybe one of the other promoters, maybe Smith, would have still taken the fight, and that would have been it no matter what. Now, the rumor is the reports were saying that in Ali's circle, Ali was absolutely adamant he wanted to take this fight. This medical eventually was actually approved via the Nevada Commission. They gave him a license to fight. I mean, I'm knocking King, because King would have seen this and King would have known it, and those around Ali were trying to convince him not to take this fight. But Ali was adamant in taking it, and there would have been another promoter out there, but Don King, as I say, just has no soul. Unfortunately, Ali got sadly beaten up by Holmes in a fight that is very difficult for me to watch. I'm sure it's for you too, Sean, and we've discussed this before. But when the fight was over and Ali got out of hospital, Don King paid him over $1 million less than the $8 million promised, therefore breaching the signed contract agreement. So not only did he know that Ali had some health issues, he should never have stepped in the ring, but he shortchanges the guy by $1 million as well.
Now, interviewed by Tom Hauser 9 years after the fight, screenwriter John Shulian said, "I hated Don King for promoting that fight. That lying, thieving motherfucker. That he could stand there and say, 'Oh, Muhammad, I love you, I'm with you, Muhammad, you're the greatest,' and then make a fortune off Ali getting brutalised that way. Well, fuck you, Don King. The man is a total scumbag. They sacrificed Ali. That's what it was, a human sacrifice for money and power. That night went far beyond Ali. One of the great symbols of our time was tarnished. So many people, blacks, whites, Muslims, Americans, Africans, Asians, people all over the world believed in Ali, and he was destroyed because of people who didn't care one bit about the things he stood for in his entire life."
Oh, it's awful, and there's more to come, but that we'll come back to that. So this is moving now back to Larry, and this is the Larry Holmes split, and the stormy partnership between Donald King and Larry Holmes lasted 5.5 years before it broke up over, of course, money that was missing from Holmes's paycheck. In 1988, Holmes told Wally Matthews, then Newsday's boxing writer, that over the course of a year, King cheated him out of $10 million. Holmes said that throughout his career, King took 25% of his purses as a hidden manager, plus expenses, and that Giachetti and Spanzani actually took 12.5% on top of that. Holmes ended up with less than 50% of the profit and the money on every fight. But the bout that basically most angered Holmes was the Jerry Cooney contest in 1982. And Holmes and most others with access to the records for the fight say that King paid Cooney at least $2 to $3 million more than Holmes when all the closed circuit revenues were divided. Jerry got his full share, but I didn't get mine. I had to sue Don over the accounting and auditing of the Cooney fight. I never saw a contract for the Cooney fight, so Holmes basically still believes, even to this day. I don't speak too much about it because he's actually got there's some sort of contract where he can't say certain things about Don. But yeah, $10 million he basically skimmed from Holmes over that 5.5 years.
Well, of course, that was the final straw between King and Holmes. It came in December of 1983 when Kings tried to have Holmes stripped of the WBC title by Jose Sullivan for not fighting the number one contender and King's new guy after he stole him from Butch Lewis, Greg Page. Now, Lewis sued King and won a settlement of $280,000 plus 33% from Page's title fights. King had bought Page's loyalty by paying for the burial of his father and seen crying over his grave. Lewis also alleged that King gave Page $200,000 under the table to sign. Holmes had enough and they split, but after the break, King told Newark-based promoter Murad Mohammed, "I'm going to get Larry Holmes and break him. I'm going to make him crawl." Murad said Holmes told him, "You've got to be careful, Don's a killer. He threatened me many times, saying, 'Don't let me go back to jail.'"
So in June 1988, Jack Newfield sat next to Larry Holmes at the Tyson Spinks fight in Atlantic City, and he spoke about King. And in Larry's own words, he says, "Don looks black, lives white, and thinks green. I was loyal to Don for 10 years, but he was never loyal to me. Don was an automatic partner. After every fight, he would say, 'Here's $10 for you, here's 20 for me.' When I see Don, I see the devil. The reason he wears his hair so funny is to hide the horns. Whenever I wanted to leave him, Don told me he would get my title stripped like Spinks and my legs broken. Holmes either never learned or he just fell under the Don King spell, because he still agreed to fight Mike Tyson in 1987 for 3.1 million. But after Holmes lost, King, who also promoted the fight, deducted 300,000 for himself from Holmes' share of the purse. Holmes did, however, reach an out of court settlement, and King paid him back 150,000, which is half of his entitlement. And Holmes signed a legal agreement promising he would stop giving reporters negative information about Don King. And King was later quoted in a New York magazine saying, "Whatever I got from Larry, I deserved it. He couldn't draw flies to a dump. I had to work with Larry on his personality to make him a big star."
So
It's
a
just
lot,
absolute art.
yeah, he is. But his quotes are just absolutely comical, aren't they? And that's the part of it that kind of makes you sort of, he draws you back in with them ridiculous quotes. So I think it's only right now where we move into where the FBI get involved and start to investigate Don King. So on July the 11th, 1980, the FBI agents we mentioned earlier, Joe Spinelli and John Pritchard, led an investigation into professional boxing as an industry. Holmes' former trainer, Rich Giachetti, turned over 5 tape recordings he had secretly made on his own accord of telephone conversations he had had with Don King, and one with Larry Holmes. Now, Giachetti had made the tapes to safeguard himself against King, just in case the two had a falling out. One of the tapes was a recording of King telling Giachetti that he had met with a mobster who had been sent by a rival promoter, and King said, "They put the mob on me. What he had hoped was that I would start mouthing off and yelling at this guy, but I was too smart. I knew if I did that, I would end up in the fucking lake. So I told this guy who I was with, and he said, 'Oh, okay, I understand.'" Now, on May the 15th, 1981, an FBI informant told Spinelli that he had found out from King that he was planning to go to Philadelphia and meet one of King's mob friends, Frankie Flowers de Alfonso, to discuss the killing of Giachetti. Then on June the 3rd, Spinelli got Harold Smith to do some undercover work for him in the hopes of getting a lighter sentence for his Wells Fargo bank fraud. He arranged for Smith to call Giachetti and record their conversation. Giachetti was recorded as saying, "That fucking King, he sent a hitman to Las Vegas to tell me to lay off him," because he basically made them tapes of King, of course. Now, he later claimed in the same call that King pays off Jose Sullivan and journalists. Giachetti then confirmed the story of the visit from a New York gangster to Mike Marley of the New York Post on August the 8th, 1981, saying, "I am fearful for my life. This guy said King told him I put a contract out on King." That story was eventually published.
Yeah, it's a bit of a to and fro between these two. Obviously, both affiliated with the Cleveland mob early in their lives, just sending hitmans to each other. Obviously, nothing come of it. No one actually hit. Clearly, just sort of flexing their muscles, I believe. I think that's what it was. Now, Spinelli then handed Holmes a grand jury summons and tried to talk him into cooperating with the investigation. Holmes reluctantly declined to say a bad word in court against King, but told Spinelli at his home, "King's got a lot of bad friends. I've got to make a living. I have a family. I'm scared for my family. I've got to be careful. He can hurt me." This is Larry Holmes saying this to Don King. It's crazy. After the Giachetti tapes were played in front of a grand jury in the Southern District, Holmes and King actually fired him the next day. Another fighter that Spinelli tried to summon to court was Sol Manby, who described how King skimmed his purses. He also got Cole King as his manager, or forced him onto him as his manager. Although his interview was taped, Manby did lie under oath, but he was never arrested for perjury. Jack Newfield once again interviewed Manby over a decade later, and he explained why he never snitched on King, and he said, I couldn't do it. I was still fighting. I needed to keep working. So I didn't tell the grand jury anything. Why was he scared? Well, in 1982, Spinelli began getting information or FBI informants and surveillance reports of King having dinners in public with some of the most leading gangsters of New York. On September 14, King dined with John Gotti of the Gambino family in Little Italy. On September 29, King had dinner with the Genovese capo, Matty the Horse Ielano, and two other mobsters of his crew. And on December 6th, King dined with both Gotti and Ielano at Abe's Steakhouse. And an informant actually reported the meeting, saying Gotti and fight promoter Don King was engaged in a heated discussion, and it appears to the source that King was in serious trouble with Gotti. Gotti later told a friend that he had slapped King during this meeting because King was not paying his debts that he owed him on time.
Now, the informant's report added that source advised that Aiello was heard to say, that guy's got to be taught a lesson and John will take care of it. So 10 years later, on July the 8th, 1992, King was questioned in an executive session by a Senate subcommittee looking into boxing. Dan Rinzel, chief counsel, asked King under oath if he had ever met John Gotti, and King invoked the Fifth Amendment, saying, I respectfully decline to answer the question on the basis of the protection offered under the Constitution. On June the 9th, 1982, Muhammad Ali finally sued Don King in the Northern District Court of Illinois. The suit asked for statutory interest and reasonable attorney's fees, in addition to the $1 million King never paid Ali. Don King was, at this point, still in fear for his life following an incident that occurred in December 1981. While in the Bahamas, trying to prevent the Ali-Trevor Berbick fight by showing a supposed valid contract with Berbick, and he wanted $100,000 from the promoter, James Cornelius. That night, Cornelius and four other men, all Muslims, came into King's room at the Bahamas Princess Hotel and basically bashed the living shit out of him, breaking his nose and knocking out some of his teeth. As soon as he got back to New York, King called up Joe Spinelli and announced that he wanted to file a complaint about the assault. He also reported a death threat on his life from another Muslim, but a Muslim minister in Philadelphia, and a mutual friend of Ali, Jeremiah Shabazz, intervened to help King. Shabazz recalled, I saved his life. He relied on me that day more than he did on the government people.
So I think the Muslim community and obviously Berbick's crew getting a raving up with King here. When basically this is probably the worst part of this whole Muhammad Ali encounter and everything about King and Ali. And King then basically used Shabazz in the summer of 1982. And he told him to get Ali to sign a contract he had drafted before handing over $50,000 in cash. So Shabazz arrived in Los Angeles and he hired a solicitor for $100 and took her with him to see Ali, who was at this time in the UCLA Medical Center receiving treatment for his deteriorating health. The solicitor read Ali the letter and asked if he understood what he was signing, as she and Shabazz sat at his bedside. Ali mumbled yes and signed the piece of paper. The contract said, I acknowledge receipt by me and Muhammad Ali Enterprises Incorporated of $7 million as full and complete consideration of Don King Productions Incorporated, and Don King's obligation to me under the bout agreement dated on the 25th of June 1980, and hereby release Don King and Don King Productions Incorporated from any or all monies due to me for which I may have been entitled to under that bout agreement. The letter Ali signed basically had squashed the lawsuit, but it also stipulated in the last paragraph saying, I further agree that you shall have the exclusive first right to refusal to promote any or all of my bouts referred to the above subject in the terms and conditions agreed upon my manager, Jabir Muhammad. And Shabazz said, after some years after, I regret what I did. I got used. When Ali told his lawyer and friend, who actually pursued the lawsuit for Ali, because obviously he wasn't well and he wanted to get his $1 million, Michael Fina, he basically told him he signed the contract which released that claim, and he said he sat in his office and cried. He was just, it's just an absolutely one of the worst things, I think. Don King's dad has murdered himself. I think this is one of the worst things in this whole thing.
I think as a side note as well, amongst all this, King began a public campaign to get an official pardon in Ohio for his first-degree manslaughter conviction. King managed to get several respected citizens to vouch for his pardon, including Coretta Scott King, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and even the Cleveland police officer William Hanson. Now, Ohio Governor James Rhode, who had received several campaign donations from King, granted King his pardon during his last week in office on January the 4th, 1983. Now, the pardon restored all of King's citizenship rights and prevented his conviction from being held against him in any future legal proceedings. So again, he's just basically bribing people to get what he needs, and it's just evident throughout the whole course of the episode so far that is just the way Don King has always operated. Now we do move into another interesting part of the Don King story, the sting operation. Now the FBI agent Spinelli was granted a considerable amount of money to create a sting operation, codename Crown Royal, that included a fake promoter with a large amount of wealth from drug trafficking. The undercover policeman Victor Quintana, and he pursued a mob associate Fran Zeze to arrange a meet with Don King so they could co-promote with King taking a cut. Now everything was recorded, and it was proof that Don had intentionally done business with a well-known gangster. Incriminating stuff, but the Bureau actually pulled the plug on the operation because they could not be seen to participate in a boxing promotion for a real match following the death of Duke Kong Kim. The South Korean had died from injuries he sustained in the ring against Ray Mancini live on telly. Now it would have looked bad if anything was to happen to a fighter on a card promoted by the FBI, so they basically got scared off, and King ends up getting off the hook because of that.
Is Don King's career at least in jeopardy because of this investigation?
Well, let me say this, Roy. First of all, let me say how sincere I feel about this country. It's just great to be an American. Only in America could Don King happen. No place else. So therefore, I feel that when the price of liberty, and it's what we treasure so much, the safeguards of liberty in our Constitution, is what makes us a mile apart between any other nation. Recognize the fact that if I was accused, indicted of anything in Russia, the KGB would have swooped me up and taken me away. It wouldn't have been no case, no due process. If I was in apartheid South Africa, there's no redress or no recourse. There's no means of defense being a black South African. You don't exist. The same thing is what they're saying about Israel between the Middle East. Boy, they don't exist, and they resent that. So I'm here in America where you have the right to due process. You know, sometimes it aberrates from the norm and the erosion of personal liberties, and I'm a victim of that aberration. However, to have this right to be able to have life, living, in pursuit of happiness, I have to take that on the chin too. And in tradition of America, I must go out and pioneer to clean my name and vindicate my name. As you said, you heard about the FBI sting that they tried to lay on me. Many years ago, throughout the time that you've known me, I've always said that I've never done anything wrong, and if anything happens to me, I'm going to be framed. Never knowing that in true essence of life that this type of act, unsavory and unscrupulous act, would take place. It did. It was exposed in the papers.
All right, let's discuss this for a second. One time we're discussing the FBI in a sting operation, a self-admitted sting operation, trying to get something on Don King. There have been allegations that your sometimes arch foe, Bob Arum, from his days when he worked with the FBI, may have tried to finger King. He may have tried to get essentially his competition out of the way by using his friends from the FBI to try to nail you. You think that might be true?
Well, all those are possibilities. You know, to see that it comes from your mind to be able to say that, I mean, it must be some thought or some conversation that is permeating the countryside to that effect. However, I don't want to deal with that. I want to deal with performing. I'm a performer. In spite of, recognize this, in spite of the insurmountable difficulties and impediments that comes across my path, I continue to perform more successful than any promoter in the history of the world, and collectively more than any contemporary promoter now.
So this investigation hasn't cut back your action right now?
No, not for a true pioneer American, because you must be able to deal with extemporaneously with whatever comes from behind the tree or from under the rock. and you must be able to deal and continue to persevere. That's why it's so synonymous with the title that I put, Perseverance on the Fight for Larry Holmes on March 15th, which will be his last. It's synonymous with our careers, my career and his, perseverance, steadfastness, tenaciousness, faith in God, and in delivering and performing. Determination is what makes it happen.
Yes, it's mad that he was so lucky. It wasn't obviously lucky for the South Korean guy that died in the ring. If they could have done that, I mean, that would have been really amazing. The FBI, they were literally funding millions and millions. They were giving this guy Rolls Royce, and they were making this guy really. They were going to do the whole promotion, and they were just to see how it all worked with the judges and everything. It was really would have been interesting if they'd have done it. Obviously, they didn't, which is such a shame because that would have been just amazing. So, with the FBI's boxing investigation over by August 1983, all the financial information that Spinelli had developed was basically turned over to the IRS, and the investigation into King developed into a tax fraud case. In 1994, Spinelli gave his assessment of the case, and he says not giving Giachetti his immunity agreement was a killer. If we had Giachetti as a witness, we could have had the tapes and the contracts and proven King was taking that 25% of Larry's money as an under boss or whatever, under management, he was a secret manager or whatever, and stopping the covert co-promotion with King, which ended all our chances to make a substantive case. So, yeah, I think the tapes, there was something wrong with the tapes. They couldn't use it in the court of law. And obviously this great scam, this undercover sting they were trying to get involved, it all just crumbled. If they had all this information, they could have produced all this information in there. I think Don could have ended up getting done.
On December the 13th, 1984, the new US attorney, Randolph Giuliani, called a press conference to announce 23-count indictment for tax fraud and conspiracy against King and Constance Harper, the vice president of DKP, but really King's personal assistant. The indictment charged King with diverting and skimming $422,000 between 1978 and 1981 from DKP, Don King Promotions, and not paying taxes, basically. Now, in a press conference, the US Attorney Giuliani said the scheme involved obtaining cash from casino cages on several occasions, on one occasion as high as $70,000, and not reporting it as income. Now, Giuliani said some of the money was used to pay King's personal gambling debt at Caesars Palace Casino. Connie Harper was charged with not paying $150,000 in taxes on other income and assisting King's skimming of accountants. Now, Don King fought back by retaining Vince Fuller of Williams and Connolly as his lawyer, and he hired and paid Andrew Lawler to be Connie Harper's lawyer. Now, on November 19th, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury actually acquitted King of all charges, but convicted Harper of tax evasion. Now, she served 4 months in prison. 8 months after, Don King flew most of the jurors over to London, put them in a luxury hotel, and gave them free ringside tickets to the Tim Witherspoon-Frank Bruno heavyweight title fight. Don King then goes and bills the promotion for the expenses, so he doesn't learn from his mistakes, clearly, and he still carries it on, and that poor girl, his assistant, ends up getting put away for 4 months.
Yeah, and I believe that she was a bit of a mistress of his as well. She was just overruled by him. Another one under the Don King spell. And in 1986, after successfully defending his belt in London against Frank Bruno, Tim Witherspoon was actually promised $2 million purse, but received a check of $100,000. It wasn't until Witherspoon lost in his first defense in the WBA heavyweight title, the first round knockout against James Bone Crusher Smith, that he took King and son Cole to court, suing them for $25 million on the grounds of fraud. During the suit, King throws Witherspoon out of the title bouts and basically dragged the court case on and out, and it just went on forever. And then in the end, Witherspoon's eventually settled out of court for just $1 million, crucified his career. On a side note, the following year at the Duran-Leonard fight, an interesting one, is a gun fell out of King's pocket in 1987 as Bob Arum was wrestling with him to prevent him from jumping into the ring after the Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler fight that Arum had promoted, and Don King had nothing to do with. Again, just trying to muscle in on Bob Arum there. But now we'll move on to the last pitch of Donald King.
So we are going to talk about, of course, the Mike Tyson takeover and the most last moment, really, of Don King's career as a boxing promoter, where we probably really seen him as one of the best promoters in the world, as much of a bastard that he was. So Don King then goes and calls Jose Torres in 1988, who was a close friend of Mike Tyson's. Now, King actually managed to get the flight details from a saddened Torres following the death of Jimmy Jacobs. Now, that flight was headed to JFK Airport in LA and included the 22-year-old world heavyweight champion Mike Tyson and his team. Now, by this point, of course, Tyson had lost Custamato, his adoptive father, in November 1985, being married to Robin Givens for a matter of weeks, who was supposedly pregnant at this point and was about to attend the funeral of Jim Jacobs. Now, Tyson stood on his own outside the airport waiting for his car when King seized the opportunity, and he planted the first seed when speaking to Torres loud enough for Tyson to hear, and he apparently said, "These people don't know how to deal with this kid. There should be a couple of limos waiting for the champ before you people got here. I'll tell you something, Muhammad Ali never had to wait this long at the airport, never." Now, King had arranged for a limo to pick him up from the airport, and it was a great chance to take advantage of Tyson and Torres. Now, he gave them a lift to the funeral, showing Tyson exactly what he could offer. King was an uninvited guest, but somehow ended up becoming one of the pallbearers, even though D'Amato and Jacobs both warned Tyson about Caton and King. Now, Tyson, of course, very upset. He cried like a baby as he embraced Jose Torres. They were both overwhelmed, rightly so, with grief. Now, King wasn't the only one taking advantage of Tyson's weakness at this point. Just before he left for the funeral, his new wife, Robin Givens, and her mother, Ruth Roper, got him to sign a letter that handed over the power of attorney to his wife for their new $4 million house. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Don King was openly making a play for Mike Tyson during the funeral in front of Caton and Jacob's closest friends. Now, King spoke directly to Tyson and proposed that he could take 4 or 5 easy fights before he met Michael Spinks to unify the title, a bout that had already been scheduled for June the 27th. Now, King was not the promoter of the Tyson-Spinks fight and was getting a set fee of $3 million for his subordinate role to Butch Lewis, Spinks' promoter. Now, during the 6 months of arse-kissing and brown-nosing, King bought Tyson 2 luxury cars. One was a Rolls-Royce convertible worth $183,000, and the other was a black Rolls-Royce limousine worth $198,000.
So back to his wife, and Robin Givens' pregnancy actually ended in an alleged miscarriage at the Atlantic City Hospital on June 3rd. Although a private detective was hired by Caton and he gained access to hospital records which said there was never a pregnancy. Then October 4th, 1988, Tyson had gone back with Caton, but 2 days later, on Thursday, October 6th, he was with Don King. King later testified at a court hearing that Tyson called him on his own accord and asked if he could come to his house for help. But both friends of Tyson and former employees of King say that King paid several people to find Tyson and bring him to his home. With Tyson now signed, Caton was still his manager with a contract valid till February 12, 1992. King took control and made moves to protect Tyson's interests. King laid out a plan for future fights and secured his assets before Givens could grab any of Tyson's money, which totaled about, at the time, $35 million. King then moved Tyson into his mansion in Ohio to keep him close over the next 6 weeks pending that divorce with Givens, which was finalised on Valentine's Day in 1989, and Givens received an actual reported settlement of more than $10 million. King cut Tyson off from old friends Torres, Rooney, Lot Breland, Brian Hamill and others, and replaced Rooney with his old pal and enemy, Giachetti. King paid Tyson $1 million per fight, plus $200,000 in training expenses, plus 66.5% of all net receipts after out-of-pocket expenses and all applicable taxes. King finally got control of Mike Tyson after a long list of unsavoury incidents, and Caton got paid 20% with King, the promoter. King made more than $10 million a year off of Mike Tyson. Everyone on the outside noticed the fall of Tyson under Don King, even Teddy Atlas, Tyson's first amateur trainer under Customato told Newfield Tyson might be destined to be a comet, not a star. His loss to Buster Douglas cemented that comment, a fight we did as well on one of our legendary night segments, and another great episode for you to go and look at. But yeah, Don King got his claws into Mike, and Mike was, as Atlas says, a comet and not a star.
So now we move into the Douglas and the Wynn case, and in July 1990, King took Douglas and Wynn to court with regards to a contract dispute, getting Donald Trump, of all people, to testify in his defence. Now, Donald Trump took to the stand and said that King had a contract with Buster Douglas and a rematch had been agreed while the fight was still happening. Trump told the jury, at the end of the fight, King and I shook hands on a rematch for $12.5 million. Making reference to the site fee Trump would pay King to deliver the fight to Trump's Atlantic City Hotel casino. Now, even Bob Arum supported King in the trial due to more hatred towards Steve Wynn, who he said had double-crossed him previously. Now, following a long, drawn-out court case, the settlement was for Douglas to have freedom to fight Holyfield, for Steve Wynn, and to be paid $24 million for his purse. King and Trump got $7 million from the Mirage for their rights, with King getting $4.5 million. King agreed to pay Douglas a promised $100,000 bonus for beating Tyson that he had to go back on when the lawsuit started. King would have the opportunity to promote a Douglas-Tyson rematch after the Holyfield defence. Of course, Douglas then went on, as we know, to lose to Evander Holyfield.
Yeah, we didn't even go into the fact what Mike Tyson and the long count, and there was a long case with that, and Douglas really got put through the mould there, really. He really went, I think he just lost his sight there. But this was going last part now, Skimming exposed. So this is Tyson was in court for actual sexual assault. He admitted that King, or Don King, still owed him over $2 million after losing to Douglas. And that was the first clear sign publicly that King was ripping Tyson off. Now, during 19 months as champion, when Caton and Jacobs controlled Mike Tyson's career, Tyson earned $48.5 million and was undefeated in 8 fights from November 1986 till June 1988. He received endorsement contracts from Toyota, Diet Pepsi, and Nintendo. In October 1988, Tyson rejected the 6-bout $50 million plan Caton proposed to him. Fights Tyson probably would have won if he still had Kevin Rooney in his corner at that time. Now, in a 2-year period under Don King, Tyson also had 8 fights, earning $29 million on paper. He received no commercial endorsements and lost his crown, his money, and his freedom.
Tyson was convicted of rape and then sentenced to 6 years in prison in 1992. On July the 14th, 1994, King was charged on 9 counts of wire fraud, 8 of them committed after his accountant Joe Mafia left Don King Productions. King was publicly exposed for skimming money from Mike Tyson without his knowledge. Yet, when Tyson was released from prison in 1995, King managed to get a new 6-fight deal with the MGM Grand worth $36 million and a $20 million advance from the casino controlled by Kerkorian to be shown on Showtime before listening to potentially better offers from HBO and other rival promoters. Tyson said, "Don is the greatest promoter in the world, as we know." Lou DiBella, HBO's vice president at the time, said Mike was playing poker with a full house and then he switched and decided to play solitaire. Now, it wouldn't be until 1998 that Tyson realised what an absolute snake King was. Mike Tyson discovered more than $20 million in missing assets. He tracked Don King down and he literally beat his ass outside a Los Angeles hotel. Iron Mike said in his film Tyson that he was triggered by King's refusal to admit any wrongdoing, and he said, "I confronted him. He basically denied it, and then I attacked him in front of all these old, decrepit white women. He's a wretched, slimy, reptilian motherfucker. He would kill his mother for $1.
I got rid of them, and then I got caught up with this other piece of shit, Don King, who's just a wretched, slimy, reptilian motherfucker. Right, this is supposed to be my brother, my black brother. Right, he's just a bad man. He's a real bad man. He abused you, and he would kill his mother for $1. He's ruthless. He's deplorable. He doesn't know how to love anybody. That's just the way he is.
Tyson obviously doing what he knows best and using his wrists, and you know what, could feel even better. And this is the last bit, the list of the lawsuits, are basically a roundup. So after Tyson, there wasn't much going on. I mean, there are so many other stories we could go on and on. We'll be here for 10 hours. In 1996, Terry Norris sued King, alleging that King had stolen money from him and conspired with his manager to underpay him for fights. The case went to trial, but King settled out of court for $7.5 million in 2003. Nice little payday for Terry Norris. In May 2003, King was then sued by Lennox Lewis, who wanted $385 million. Yeah, right. You're never getting that, Lennox, from Don. Basically claiming that Don King used threats to pull Tyson away from the rematch with Lewis.
Now, in 2005, Don King launched a $2.5 billion defamation suit against the Walt Disney Pictures owned ESPN, the makers of Sports Century, after a documentary alleged that King killed not once but twice, threatened to break Larry Holmes' legs, cheated Meldrick Taylor out of $1 million, and then threatened to have Taylor killed. Through the documentary repeated many claims that were already made. King said he had now had enough, and King's attorney said it was slanted to show Don in the worst way. It was one-sided from day one. Don is a strong man, but he's been hurt by this. The case was dismissed because King could not show actual malice from the defendants, and that King had failed to prove that any of the challenge statements were false. Following an appeal, Judge Dorian Darmorgian ruled nothing in the record shows that ESPN purposefully made false statements about King in order to bolster the theme of the programme or to inflict harm on King.
Well, I don't think there's no way he could prove that those allegations were false. So, I mean, he's done it plenty of times himself. It's nice to start hearing him get a little bit of a taste of his own medicine and people exposing him for really the slime bag he was. And then in early 2006, Chris Boyd also sued Don King in breach of a contract, and the two eventually settled out of court under the condition that Bird would be released from his contract with King. And one thing we haven't mentioned is that in 1997, King was actually inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. That basically wraps up Don King. I mean, there is as there's so many stories. I mean, the one thing I get from this is if you was on a life support machine, Don King would turn it off to charge his phone. He is that kind of fella. He is as slippery as they come, and I think this it just confirms it for me. Some of the stuff with Ali, absolutely just dreadful. There are so many other stories. I mean, we could keep going, Sean. We may even need to come back to this, pick up on some of the stories that we haven't mentioned. But he will be back again, no doubt about it.
Well, I think he certainly will be back at some point. But like we said, if we included everything we've already covered off in some of the other episodes, I think it would have been a bit too much of a repeat for some people that listen to our episodes across the network, which is why we decided to come at you with basically stories that you might already know about. And obviously, if you do, it's because you've done a lot of research into it. But there were stories that when doing the research for it, none of us knew about it. And he just cemented our perception of him in our minds as that dodgy Don King, the slippery motherfucker, the guy that we've always spoke about skimming from different fighters and robbing them, but yet in the same sense helped produce and promote some of the great fights of all the different eras, which is the crazy part about it. And then you can't help but laugh at his catchphrases and his anecdotes, and it's crazy to think that although he's an absolute slimy guy, in some senses of the word, he did a lot of good for the sport as well as doing a lot of bad. It is really a Marmite situation. You either love the guy or you hate the guy. And for us, whilst we can appreciate what he's done for the sport, in some respects, the stuff that he's done on the other side of the coin, the murder of Sam Garrett, the skimming of all this money, the fraud, letting people take the fall for him, it's just one slimy bastard, and that's the way we see him. And this is why we've been wanting to do an episode like this for such a long time. And it was only one way we were going to be able to do this episode on Don King, and that was the darker side of boxing. This was the perfect place to put this episode, and I've thoroughly enjoyed doing this. I really have, and it's just brought to light even more evidence that Don King is that reptilian motherfucker that Tyson said he is.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And as you say, right, I mean, you can't deny that. I mean, we was even going to get to the point where we start going to just run through some of the major fights that Don King promotions or productions have done, and you know what? There were so many. Again, it just added a whole. It have added a whole nother part to it. He has produced some of the greatest fights that we've ever watched, and we've done many legendary nights that he's promoted. You can't knock him as a promoter. He will charm the pants off anyone. He's got the gift of the gab, absolutely. But as a person, he's a very self-centered piece of shit, and he didn't care about anyone. And I think the one thing I got from it is just that moment when he managed to convince somebody to get Ali to sign that contract on his bedside. That just didn't sit right. I mean, obviously the murder of Sam Garrett obviously is a murder. Had to be dark side of boxing. We was looking at it as a career profile. You know, if you're going to be a murderer, there's only one place you're going to fit on our episodes. Although the great stuff he's done for boxing, I think we've done him justice. We've got so many stories in there. New stories, some people are going to know, others they're not going to know. But look, you know, we had to do a nice long episode on Dodgy Don King.
So, fight fans, if you've enjoyed this, please let us know. Please go and tweet us at darker_side_pod, and you can find us also on Facebook, the BTR Boxing Podcast Network page as well. And if you've not already subscribed to the Patreon account, you can do that by checking us out, patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast. Please go and do it. I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode of The Darker Side of Boxing. This was all about the wheeling, the dealing, and the stealing of Dodgy Don King.